Hi, everyone. This is Reverend Amina McIntyre, Connection to Young Adult Ministry President, and I'm here with the 44th Bishop of the CME Church, Bishop Othal Lakey. We're so excited to have him here today. Say hello, Bishop Lakey.
Hello, how is everyone? I'm happy to be here with Reverend Amina McIntyre, and I'm doubly delighted because when I became the Bishop of the 60th Episcopal District back in 1994, she was the youth president. And I had the honor of working with her as my youth president.
Yeah, so we go, I've learned a lot about leadership from Bishop Lakey, and we go way back, I guess, in a lot of ways.
I won't tell all the little stories.
Please don't.
All the little stories I have about her. Because she gets embarrassed when I talk about she didn't know who Joe Namath was when I asked her to. He's a famous football player. But what I didn't tell her about being generational, back in, I think it was 1970, I was at the General Conference. One night, one of the young adults from Dallas ran and got me and said, "Oh, Reverend Lakey, come meet Isaac Hayes. He's downstairs. Come see Isaac Hayes." And I said, "Who is Isaac Hayes?" So things are always generational. So
right.
don't feel bad about it. But it's good to be here with you. May I call you Amina?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
It's good to be here and share with you, and just new for me. I presume some young adults somewhere in the world, okay?
Yes, absolutely. Young adults and probably people from all over the denomination. But you recalling those stories is actually why you're here today. One of the reasons that we asked for Bishop Lakey to be on the Web Summit is because he has been the church historian. And he's also been a bishop over the Department of Christian Education, which is now Department of Christian Education and Formation. But we wanted to talk to you first just about, can you talk to us about what the historian position of the CME Church was like, why it was developed, and the importance of CME Church history?
Yes. The importance of history can hardly be overestimated. I think the historian John Meacham says that history is the present in conversation with the past in preparation for the future, which means that you cannot really develop your future as an individual or as an organization unless you are in conversation with those with the past. And by past, we mean those factors that have made you or your organization what it is today. If you don't understand that or those issues, then you cannot properly, adequately chart your future. So as a historian of the church, I tried to help the church understand the contours of its past so that it could properly plot the future of the church. And that's what historians do. To us, it's a labor of love, but it's laborious. For example, finding footnotes. That's dull stuff when you're in school. But for the historian, that's when you look at a book, the thing you want to look for are the footnotes. Because this is where stuff really, really takes place. For example, when I was doing my family history, tracing my ancestry, I was looking through the census reports for Louisiana, where we come from, and I ran across a census report of 1870 from Bienville Parish in Louisiana. And the census said it came to a household called the Bush household, and the entry was written in, wasn't typed or anything, Victoria, 1 year old. Victoria was my grandmother. Now, I remember my grandma, as most of us do, as this old, prickly, dark woman who had to walk with a cane. That's what I remember. And each summer we would go spend 2 weeks at grandma's house. And here I was sitting, looking at a census report, and Victoria was 1 year old. Now so it done me that out of that experience came the 44th Bishop of the Church. So this is why history is important. You gather up what your past is, and those are the issues that help you be what you are. Or again, one of my great uncles, G.C. Roster, back in 1906, represented the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church as the official representative to the ME Church South General Conference. But that doesn't mean much to anybody. But in 1972, the bishops chose me to go represent the CME Church at the General Conference of the Methodist Church meeting in Mobile, Alabama. So you connect your present with your past in order to chart your future. And so what I've been able to do was to document the history of the CME Church, to document the woman's movement in the CME Church, and to look at all of the things that happened. Like when I look at the young adults today, I marvel at they don't realize that Lucius Holsey was elected bishop at age 31.
Right.
Which meant he was one of the top spokespersons at the 1870 General Conference when he was 28 or so. Right. So you see, the history helps us understand who we are and how we got to be where we are. But the danger is, and some of our organizations do this, we live in our past rather than out of our past. Right. And the challenge to each generation, I'm not just talking about the young adults, because sorry to say, my young adult brothers and sisters, you won't be a young adult always.
I don't think we have a problem with that.
Believe me, you won't be a young adult. But as you chart your future, what happens today as a young adult, as you understand the church, is how you will deal with the church. If I may use this as an illustration, when I was a young preacher, we were very active and loud. Remember, my generation was the civil rights generation, the protest generation. We fussed and cussed at white folks and all that. Well, part of that carried over within the church. So we were very vocal and protesters within the structure of the church. We raised all kinds of standards, conferences and all. Well, we had an conference once and we would do some stuff. And Bishop John Claude Allen, looked over the pulpit and said, "Look, you young preachers, we're not going to let you run this church now. You're not ready for it." Then he said, and this is what stuck with me, "But you get ready, because one of these days you're going to run the church whether you're ready or not." And I thought about that when I became a bishop in the church. Was I ready to do all the stuff I was trying to tell Bishop Allen he ought to be doing back when I was a young preacher? Now I was in the position Bishop Allen was in. Was I ready for that responsibility? So that would be my challenge to the young adults. Are you going to get yourself ready while we sing? And I'm not saying, I'm not being critical of your being critical, because we sat where you sit. But I ask you, as you're critical of what's going on in the church today, and that's what young generations do, are you preparing yourself to lead the church when you become where I am? Because though I was the 44th bishop of the church, Bishop C. James King is the 63rd bishop, the last bishop elected. That's an almost 20 bishop spread. Well, I appointed C. James King to the Church of Brown Memorial in Louisville. One of the first appointments I made as a bishop was to find this, he was recommended, of course, this brilliant, young, powerful, young preacher, and appoint him to that church, which was almost unheard of because he was a young adult. And he carried that church to tremendous heights. And that's what we have to do. Get yourself ready for the leadership of the church. So that's generally what I do as an historian. And historians are also very critical. And a lot of people think that that's personal. It's not personal, because when you see what happened here, what happened there, and why, and when we understand why things happen, then you can properly correct it. A lot of mistakes have been made because people like a plumber. If he doesn't know which pipe needs to be tapped, he will tap the wrong pipe. And if he hits a gas line instead of a water line, then he blows up the house.
Right. So
you got to know what is what and where is where. Mm-hmm. And that's what historians help point you to. That's on. The other thing I want to talk about, would like to talk to the young adults about is, and I think Bishop Barack Obama said this, is hope.
Right.
One of my, I'm not saying this is a critique, but it's a concern that the millennial generation seems a bit overly pessimistic. Mm. I don't get a sense of hope. Mm. And now hope is based on faith. And it's not faith in the system. Mm-hmm. See, it's faith in God. And we make a mistake when we become overly critical of the systems we inherit, as if our faith is in the system. The faith is in God. And we as human beings require systems to carry out the will of God. But to simply tamper with systems and not deal with the faith that the systems represent misses the point. You can rearrange the furniture on the Titanic, but unless a navigator knows where the iceberg is, mm-hmm. you still would be destroyed.
Right.
So we need systems, yes, but systems change. Last year, or at the last Unity Summit, I was asked to give a lecture to the presiding elders. Mm-hmm. And I pointed out to the presiding elders that until 1906 is what historians do. Mm-hmm. In 1906, it was not until 1902, that presiding elders began to hold district conferences. Mm-hmm. Because up until 1902, bishops held district conferences. But as the church got bigger and bigger, it was no longer practical for bishops to hold district conferences. So then the church turned that over to presiding elders. Mm-hmm. Systems change according to circumstances and conditions. You are a new generation. Here I am on what y'all call it?
This is called Zoom, yes.
Well, now I don't know a thing about Zoom. Mm-hmm. This is a new innovation, and hopefully someday I can learn how to handle it. But the message that you get on Zoom has to be the same message that I tried to learn when I was studying Greek from a Japanese professor at a Church of Christ college, Pepperdine College, mm-hmm. in 1953. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that the message that was in that Greek New Testament mm-hmm. is the same message that we're going to convey on Zoom. Right. Now, the message isn't determined by the system. The system only becomes the channel by which the message of Jesus Christ is projected. So my point to young adults is don't become so wrapped up in the systems you inherit and beating and stomping and cuss about the system, because the system is going to change according to circumstances. Sure. But it is the faith, because what is it the Apostle Paul said? We have this treasure in earthen vessels. Right. Well, don't get confused with the vessel, so much so that you lose the treasure. But I was like, what are some of the problems you young adults have?
Well, and it's interesting. You mentioned a lot of things and really spoke kind of broadly about just history and politics and things, and even the conversation about systems. So for us, when we started with this particular administration, the first thing we did was we started to ask ourselves the kinds of conversations and questions that we never get to ask each other. And so we first started by assessing our own gifts. And then we started placing ourselves in different places. We created a system where we were like, well, let's come up with committees that do different things and define their work and start to just kind of start to put out into the atmosphere the kinds of things we want to see in the denomination. And for us, that's how Zoom came about. And so we've actually done for General Conference when we realized we had a lot of young adults who were first-time General Conference delegates. We recognized that they might need some knowledge. And so we said that we needed to educate ourselves more. And so we started to really kind of focus on education. And that's something I think that all young adults that I consistently talk to, they're all wanting to know more knowledge about the church. They want to know how the church works. They want to know what they can do, and they want to know how they can bring their skills into what we're doing. And so when we did the Web Summit, so many people were so excited because we brought used technology to bring in a skill that everybody wanted. They wanted to know more about the discipline. They wanted to know more about the church. And we had a variety of people come on. And people still watch it now. It's still on YouTube. It's something that kind of lives and breathes that people can access. I think another thing that a lot of young adults, they want to have apprenticeship and mentorship. And I say them differently because people, and I'm talking about this in terms of history and historically, a lot of times I've seen and read where people will say, oh, we notice you have these have you started thinking about this course? Well, maybe you can start going this direction. And I think that those kinds of systems of mentorship and apprenticeship have, as our generations have gotten a little older, and even with the civil rights movement, I think because a lot of lives were cut short, we never got to the place where mentorship and apprenticeship models were really something that was really embedded and breathing in our communities. And so I think that they've been dismantled. And so I think that one, mentorship being a way that you can kind of, there's some kind of maybe an elder kind of giving you specific guidance, an apprenticeship where you're actually shadowing someone so you can learn what their positions are and learning how their jobs are. And so I think those are two of the main things: education, mentorship, and apprenticeship are things that the young adults are craving and really desiring.
Well, I think all of us do that. The difficulty is that how do you relate from my generation or older people? How do you relate to young adults? To the younger generation, because you can't mentor a person who does not want to be mentored. And mentorship is not the same as being in a class.
Right.
Mentorship is more of an emulation. My quote mentor was Bishop Norris Samuel Curry. Now he didn't mentor me in terms of sitting down saying this, that, and the other. He sort of watched me and kind of nudged me, and I was admiring him as an example. For example, I got ready to go to college. He said, when you go to college, don't take any religion, which shocked me. And I said, why? He said, because the religion you learn in college is not the solid understanding of the faith that you're going to have when we send you to theological school. So he told me, you learn history and philosophy in college. Then when you get to theological school, then you're going to learn the fundamentals of the faith. Now that was mentorship.
Right.
And when we had, I was pastoring our church, and I went to him and said, I have all of these factions in my little church. What do I do? He didn't give me the 1, 2, 3s. He says, when you have the factions in the church, just don't get tied up with one faction. You pastor all of the people.
Right.
and try to find a middle road. See, mentors sort of nudge and guide.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like a football player with extraordinary talent. You can't teach him the talent, but you can give him some nudging on how he can improve his talent. Tony Dorsett was one of the outstanding running backs of the Dallas Cowboys. Happened to be my favorite football team.
Of course.
Until he was a better running back in my judgment in terms of natural talent than Emmitt Smith, who was also a great running back.
Sure.
But when Tony Dorsett came, the one thing they had to teach Tony Dorsett, they didn't teach him his talent. They had to teach him to wait for the hole to open.
Sure. Because
he was so talented, he wanted to get to the hole before it was time.
Mm-hmm.
They had to teach him in our system the way the hole is going to open up for you, mm-hmm. but you have to wait, know when the hole, and then when you get through the hole, then you're on your own. Mm-hmm. Then you use your talent. All I'm saying is that mentorship is to nudge you, give a hint, give a direction, and then let you blossom.
Right.
And I've seen this in you. We didn't tell you, I mean, go do this, go do that, but I think we kind of nudge you, put you in certain positions, and then you developed on your own. So that's what mentorship is. Right. And I think the church looks for mentors. We want to be mentors.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And I think the biggest question about that is I think it's about relationship. Yeah. Because as we mentioned before, you've known me since I was much younger. And so as I moved into being president and then as I moved into college, that I already had a relationship with you. And I think a lot of times, and part of this has to do with social media, a lot of it also has to do with just how things have changed. I think that as a society, we don't nurture relationships as much anymore. And I think that sometimes, a lot of our elders definitely want to have conversations with the youth and young adults. And I think youth and young adults definitely still want to have those conversations, but I think people just don't know how to talk to each other. And then also, because I think critique on both sides is important because, I have no problems disagreeing with you on whatever, but I think that with critique and with disagreement, people have to remember with critique and disagreement comes knowledge. And I think we never get to that point sometimes.
And also, points of view are often generational.
Right.
And the way we see things comes out of our history.
Right.
And we have to be very careful that our disagreements are not substantive, but generational.
Right.
And I was very outspoken when I was a youngster. For example, I couldn't dance. But we were in Sunday school convention, and the older preachers were condemning at that time dancing. That was a big scene. Well, as a young preacher, knew the Bible and all that stuff. I took on arguments with the presiding elder and the older preachers about dancing was not a sin. Now, I couldn't dance, but I felt that I should defend because I knew the Bible more than my young brothers, my brothers and sisters in the convention. Well, the bishop, the older preacher told the bishop that Lakey boy tries to knows everything, he fusses it. Right. So I was condemned for being that outspoken young preacher. But the wiser preachers, G.L. Hayes and Dr. Curry, they said, no, leave that boy alone. He's developing his own mind and heart and skill. And when I got to be on the American Religious Town Hall and represent the Black church experience in this forum, all of those skills, that protest and all, came to bear. when I was doing things in the civil rights movement, and we make a big mistake when we confine the civil rights movement only to the movement of which Martin Luther King became the representative or the idol or the image. That goes all the way back to even the setting up of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, the colored Methodist. It was a civil rights development. Well, Lucius Holsey and Isaac Lane and the others went to the white Methodist Church, Methodist Church South, and said, "You owe us our own church." And the Methodist Episcopal Church South ordained, consecrated the first black bishops, Methodist bishops that were in America, that were out of the Methodist tradition. They gave the CB Church all of the property that was used by blacks in the church. This came out of a protest movement. And all the way down the line, we have protested. And there's nothing wrong with that, but to confine it to one generation is wrong.
It's wrong.
But the problems young blacks face today in terms of racism are totally different.
Absolutely.
Because it's one thing, you never experienced this, I don't think, of having to go to the colored restroom or sit in the back of the bus because you're colored. We did. It's one thing that to protest and they take the signs down, but it's another thing when you're driving at midnight as a young black man and they stop you and sometimes shoot you because you're black. That's a totally different experience because then it was overt.
Right. It
was out in the open. Now it's subtle.
Right.
It's systemic.
Right.
And your fight for equality is a different fight.
Right.
But the issues are still the same.
Right. And I think too, even with that, and because the young adults are also concerned with intersectionality, because now, even though there's racism, but there's also, we have to deal with sexism, we have to deal with classism, we have to deal with LGBTIQ issues, we have to deal with all of the other things that, even though racism has trumped them before, now anybody who's under the age of 40 are having these conversations already because it's something in everyday life. It's something we're not only seeing in TV, but also just having in conversation, where before some things may not have been talked about, but now people are saying if we have to honor our whole selves, then we have to figure out a way to have all of these conversations and have them in church too.
Of course, you know, we hope how much time we have.
Yeah, we probably are going over our time now because we're just talking, but yeah. But
well, but I was gonna say, we actually, though, with all due respect, our generation sort of laugh a little bit at you all struggles. You know why we laugh?
Why?
We went through the same struggle.
So in the history of it, only one part of it just gets written down. Is that what
all of these issues.
Right.
But you see, history, the public history only deals with what's popular.
Sure.
But I was telling someone, in fact, I was telling my wife that the Harvey Weinstein thing, all of these, well, these were girls, beautiful actresses trying to get in Hollywood. And this was the casting couch. That was bad and all that. But I said, black women, instead of joining the Me Too movement, should have a us first movement. Because what did the slave owners do to our great-great-grandmothers and great-great-grandfathers? When is somebody gonna carry somebody to court? When is somebody gonna raise some sand? When is somebody gonna say, what did they do to our mothers, great-grandmothers, and grandfathers? They weren't asking to be actresses. They weren't trying to get to be in movies. They were human beings that was stolen and raped and mistreated and molested. That was way before these pretty little white girls said they were molested.
But see, what I think what's even interesting in that is that the person who founded the concept of Me Too, Tarana Burke, was a black woman. And so even, and in her mind, doing that kind of work was the impetus for it before it became a Harvey Weinstein, before it became something that was popular for everyone else. But she was the founder of the movement, and if you talk to her, those were some of the things that she was looking at.
But you see, that's my point. That now the media emphasis, the popular image is on these models and the terrible things they did to our race. Are things that we need to really begin to look at.
Right. Absolutely.
I really enjoyed this. So,
so I just want to ask one last question to you. I know we've kind of talked about a lot of different things. In terms of looking at history and moving forward, where is, if you wanted to, oh no, go ahead. Sure. Okay. If you are recommending others, especially as we're looking at our history, if you're recommending to young adults how to really kind of get integrated with history, how to get integrated with understanding deeper the knowledge of the CME Church, what would you recommend, and how would you encourage young adults to, and even the entire denomination, because more than just young adults be watching, but how would you encourage them to get involved and to pick that mantle up?
Well, read my book, I would.
Well,
it's only 400 pages. Okay.
Yeah, I read it. Like, I'm a good CME, I've read it.
But things like this, and you don't have to do history in terms of 400-page book. You do it one bite at a time. Sure. Begin with your own story and your own history and the life that you know. Where did your great-grandmama go to church? What did your grandfather do? Who was that first Sunday school teacher? Who was that? And if I could give this one illustration. When I was 8 or 9 years old, our Sunday school teacher was Sister Tyson. And Sister Tyson, the little black woman with bony fingers, had a class of little boys. They were doing no more, but little boys, about 5 or 6 of us. We would go to class, sit up there, and Sister Tyson with her bony finger would rap on the desk and say, "Othal, what's the subject of the lesson?" Mm-hmm. Now, since those days, I've studied under the great theologians of the world. Mm-hmm. You know, I've been blessed. But the memory I have is not the great theologians at Theological University or at Perkins at Southern Methodist University. The memory of the impact on me was Sister Tyson rapping on that desk, saying, "Othal, what's the subject of the lesson?" And I studied harder to have the subject of the lesson for Sister Tyson than I did for the great theologians I had to write papers for and write books for. Mm-hmm. So start with who you are and where you are. And don't be afraid, young adults, to come up to a bishop, being obliging, and ask some questions about who they are, how they got to be. And you would be surprised how their stories match your stories. And remember now that all of us have tried to nurture some of you, that we fought the battles. We gave the budget, set up the budgets for the young adult ministry. Right. And one of these days, one of our history lessons ought to be, the next time we do this, how the young adult organization came to be. Right. Both its strengths and, if you don't mind, which is what history is all about, also some of the weaknesses that we need to work on to improve it to become more and more of a ministry to the church and for the church. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. We enjoyed having you. And thank you all so much for tuning in. There's more to come this week. So tune in and we'll see you all later.